It's time for another edition of Saturday with Seniors, brought to you by Eisenhower's, Tioga County, Harley-Davidson, south of Mansfield. And if you need a place to store your bike this winter, somewhere it'll be safe, somewhere you don't have to worry about the cat climbing all around it or it getting scratched like your garage, you can store it for free at Eisenhower's, Tioga County, Harley-Davidson, as long as you have at least $899 or more on parts and labor done to that bike over the wintertime. So think about it. Maybe you need some new tires. Maybe you want some more chrome, some more horsepower, some whatever. You can get free storage by meeting those requirements. See their Facebook page or give them a call for all the details on that. And thank you for sponsoring Saturday with Seniors, Eisenhower's, Tioga County, Harley-Davidson. Today, we have Bruce Dart joining us here. Bruce Dart, longtime resident of Mansfield. You may know some of his photography work. A veteran, too. We'll have plenty to talk about on Saturday with Seniors. And I'm with Bruce Dart, sitting right here at his house. And hello, Bruce. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Kevin.
Well, how are you today?
Oh, doing great today.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us on the program. A lot of people know you from your photography that you've been doing for, I don't know, longer than I've been in the area.
Try 46 years.
46 years of photography. Wow. Let's go back. What year were you born? I want to ask you older. I'll just ask you what year you were born. Or I can ask you both, I guess.
1946.
I would have never guessed. You get around like a youngster still. So you were born in Tioga County, right? And your parents were from Tioga County?
From Mansfield, yeah.
So what did your parents do for work when you were born or when you're in the early days for them?
Well, Mom was a house mother, but Dad worked as an electrical contractor. He had 3 careers, actually. He worked as an electrical contractor for his stepfather, George Dyer, for 17 years, and then George closed out the shop, and then Dad went to work at Mansfield College at the time. He was in refrigeration and air conditioning for 17 years, and then he drove bus for Endless Mountains for 17 years for the seniors.
Wow. You have brothers and sisters, too?
Yeah, I have a sister out in Minneapolis, 1 brother here in Mansfield, and then 2 other brothers that passed away.
So it sounds like your mom had a full-time job taking care of all of you. Being a mom back then and taking care of kids was so much more work than now. Your mom probably made everything from scratch, made most of the meals, and things weren't as automatic as they are now.
No, definitely not as automatic. And 3 toddlers. My brother Steve was 2 years younger than me, and Larry was 3 years younger. So 3 of us were quite small at the same time. I don't know how my mother survived it.
So where did you grow up in You grew up in Mansfield? That was where you were?
In Mansfield.
Yeah, right in town?
We lived initially on Elmira Street and then moved to St. James Street, but some people have never been out of the county. I've been all over the world. I had a 32-day travel abroad tour of Europe, my last 6 credits of college, and then I spent 4 years in the Navy and went out on the West Coast into Asia. So
you've been everywhere, as they say. Well,
yeah, not quite like Hank Snow, but it's everywhere.
So growing up in downtown Mansfield, then you probably had utilities then as a kid. Some of the people we've had on the show back when they were, born in the 40s and 50s were still off the grid or had an outhouse or a hand pump well even.
Well, there was no internet.
Okay. and there wasn't TV either, or was there? You were still before TV until you were probably 10 years old.
Yeah, I was 6 or 8 somewhere in there when we got our first TV, and it was one of those with the very snowy with rabbit ears and the whole 9 yards. It was crazy, but I mean, so much of life, and especially some of these other countries, you deal with what you have.
Yep.
And I remember even teaching some photography classes where they talk about the camera obscura, maybe. They referenced it, the artist used it because it was a supposedly easily portable room that they used like a pinhole camera to sketch with. It provided an upside down image on the back side of the room. Well, I can't imagine a room being portable. But if that's the only thing you got and there's no other alternative, it's better than some things.
I interviewed Pee Wee House from House Lumber and Morris Run when he was a kid, and the sawmill was portable then. Now we bring the logs to the sawmill. When he was a kid, they brought the sawmill to the logs. So things certainly have changed. You went to school in Mansfield, I assume, or was that up at the university when you went to school?
Well, kindergarten through 6th grade was there. And my 7th grade class was in what became Allen Hall. And then the 8th grade, they had a new school, and I went to junior high down at the new school. And then, of course, I went to Mansfield College at the time. I not only went there and graduated from there, but after 4 years in the Navy, I came back and worked there for 6 years.
So quite a tie into the community. What do you remember about your early days of school? Any memories of things in elementary type school or in that age that you remember? Your favorite class or teachers? Or?
Well, I had an interesting scenario cameo there. Steve Bensetic became Dr. Stephen Bensetic. He taught me art in kindergarten, his first year in Mansfield. My 32-day travel abroad tour of Europe was an art tour, was for 6 credits, and the guy who led the tour was Dr. Stephen Bensetic. So I started and ended my formal education with Steve. That was awesome.
Wow. So he was quite an inspiration then to you, I imagine.
Yeah.
So,
and he came out with some things that we never would have realized. We were looking at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, and he came out with some tidbits. He says, look up there in that corner up there. You see an image of the devil up there. And he says the devil's face was the bishop who kept bugging him all the time.
It is always interesting going to see things with somebody who has had a lifetime appreciation for that type of thing. Like, I'd enjoy going to a photography museum with you because you would explain everything to a whole different level than my eye would understand.
Yes, there's a lot of background stuff with things, and it's fascinating, and I have enjoyed teaching different aspects of it over the years. In fact, my craftsman degree from the Professional Photographers of America is basically a teaching degree, and I had to put on 14 different programs for other professional organizations in order to earn that degree, along with other service and education merits.
Wow. Okay.
All that is pretty good for a guy who was scared to even get up and talk in front of a group all the time I was in high school. And nobody that I knew in high school would ever have imagined that I would be in front of a microphone at a program for anything.
I was pretty quiet in school, too. I think some people would be surprised with me as well. So when you were in school, you were talking about your kindergarten, your art teacher, and you have some other memories of school, things that are different now in school. Was there more a strict dress code, requirements?
It was probably different, and that's a thing that everybody was used to. Okay, we think about having dress codes and things like that. Like, well, how did that ever evolve? I mean, that's kind of the way it always was. And so we didn't think anything about it. I don't know that we had a dress code per se, but
everybody dressed nice because that's what's expected.
Fairly nicely, and everybody kind of expected that.
Did you walk to school both ways uphill?
Until I went to work on my grandfather's farm, and then I rode the school bus, yeah.
And then from the farm, all right. And sports in school, were you into any of those or more the art?
I played a little basketball in school. I started my junior year being on the team, but I was working on the farm, and our coach, Joe Tossi, wanted to get us in shape, and we did a lot of running. Well, after working chores in the morning and chores at night and doing all that running, I couldn't do that anymore, and I had to drop out of the team, but I did play a little bit my senior year.
And the farm you're talking about, you lived at the farm when you helped out there, or just went out there during
No, I lived at the farm with my grandparents and helped my grandfather with all the chores.
So your grandfather grew up in this area too? Did your family go back that far?
Well,
not go back that far. Go back to Tioga County that far, I should say.
Well, yeah. It's taken me 25 or 30 years to learn all this stuff, but my grandfather in particular was from the Corning and Elmira area. His name was Ainsworth Booth, and he was the namesake of Dr. Herman Reeve Ainsworth, who was a medical doctor in Addison, New York. And my great-grandfather had 2 brothers that were pretty famous in Elmira. My great-grandfather Wilfred had a candy company in Elmira in early 1900, and then he ended up being vice president of one of the banks up there. His brother Arthur was a medical doctor that they named Booth School after. And the other one is still rather famous. I mean, he's long since gone, but the company he started is still rather famous, and that's the Plumbing Heating Supply ID Booth Incorporated in Elmira. That was my grandfather's background.
And then farming.
And he was a gentleman farmer. He did have a degree in accounting.
Mm-hmm. So a little bit of everything there. So tell me about life on the farm. Was that a modern farm or?
It was a gentleman's farm. They initially bought up 3 farms. It was 330 acres, which was pretty extensive at the time. And we did all the usual farm work. We put in hay. We milked the cows. We fixed fence. We did everything.
You had a milking machine, or were you the milking machine?
There were milking machines and milk cans at the time. It wasn't all that automated. The machines were automated, but we had to dump them and pour it into a milk can.
So a little more work and baling hay. You know about throwing bales of hay into a...
We threw a lot of bales of hay, yeah.
What did you do for fun when you were a kid? When you were in high school, did you go out to the movies? There used to be the roller skating rink here. What was for entertainment for you as a kid, Bruce?
I went once or twice to roller skating rink and found out that wasn't my degree of expertise. But no, I was always pretty pretty busy. I had a bicycle and the Mansfield pool and then the recreation programs and all that sort of thing. The usual kid stuff that kept us all pretty busy.
Did you go out to eat often at any of the restaurants, or did you have a favorite place to go for ice cream or food?
That wasn't a thing as much in those days. It became later on. It wasn't initially,
Yeah, there was no fast food here when you were a kid.
No, there was not. It wasn't not even in anybody's vocabulary at the time.
In town, I've talked to people who have been in town. They said, I think it was Friday. They said Friday night. It was sort of the busy evening in Mansfield, and people would come in and do their shopping, and town would be busy.
Absolutely. The business people were all open on Friday night, and most of the people came into town on Friday night to do all their shopping. And when I got involved later with the chamber, it was tough for a lot of people to realize to break out of the mold that was established those days. Because they were open Friday night, they closed on Wednesday afternoon. Mm-hmm. And it was tough to break some of these people out of the habit of being closed Wednesday afternoon. I remember particularly talking to one of them, whom I also played on the basketball team with, but he complained that he didn't have as much business as he would like. I said, Byron, you're closed on Wednesday afternoon and you go play golf. You got to be open.
It was still that way in 1995 when I moved here. A few of the businesses closed half a day on Wednesday.
And then once they latched onto it, they didn't want to let go of it, but they weren't open Friday nights.
Yeah. Where'd you go do your groceries back then?
Back then, it ended up being the A&P store.
Is that where Partners in Progress is now?
No, that was where the First Citizens parking lot is now.
Oh, that's right. There was a plaza in there.
Plaza right there. And this was on the corner.
Mm-hmm. I vaguely remember that at the very beginning when I moved here.
Not only did they go there, but I ended up putting myself through college by working there. So I was very familiar with that store.
Uh-huh. Because you made a ton of money, right? It was probably $3 an hour, $2 an hour?
Try half that. $1.47.5 is what I started with in 1965.
A fraction of a cent, $1.47 and a half.
Yeah. I don't know how they worked that, but it did.
Uh-huh.
And it's another one of those things that if that's the way it is, and even at the time, even a well-paid teaching job was paying about $6,500 a year. So, I mean, those were different times, and the money went a little farther.
A little further. $100 bill, you were rich back then.
Yeah. I remember one time that when I ran the checkout for people substituted for them while they went to lunch, and it was a busy time at lunch, and you could get a decent bag of groceries for $20. Okay. In an hour's time, I ran $600 worth of groceries through my checkout line until they came back to relieve me. And that was a pile of groceries at the time.
Now that's 2, 3.
And none of it was automated. There were no...
Oh, all the stickers are on there.
There was a price on it. We had to punch it into the register and punch it in by category. There was produce, there was taxable, there was grocery, and they all had their own category. And there was nothing...
No UPC codes on there to scan.
No codes, nothing scanned, nothing automated.
I'm old enough to remember as a kid my parents putting all the stuff on the conveyor belt for the grocery store and putting the price tags on the top so that the person running the register could find the price easier. My dad corrected me. No, put that this way, Kevin. You got it upside down.
Yeah, but you got to do that because otherwise it takes you way longer to get through the line.
Yeah.
So you do it to make their job a little bit easier at the time as well.
When you were young, festivals, fairs in the community, the Great Mansfield Fair, I remember
the Great Mansfield Fair was very active at the time in my youth, and they had parades, and my mother and my grandmother liked to dress us up and be various characters in the parade. I had a cousin who was from out of town originally. Her parents were from Binghamton area, but anyway, they were around, especially during the summer and when we had the Mansfield Fair, and I remember we weren't very big, and they dressed my cousin and I up as the King and Queen of Hearts.
It wasn't Halloween. It was just fair time to dress that way.
It was fair time, yeah. And
what do you remember about the fair? Was it a busy fair? That's all happened at Smythe Park, and I think I want to say the last fair was in the late 1950s, early 60s. 56,
58, somewhere in there was the last fair. And my dad's stepfather was actually secretary of the Fair Association. So we had a lot of memorabilia that came back from the fair that was handed down to my dad, and I had a bunch of it, and I think I gave most of that to the History Center. There were all tons of things from the early 1900s fair books, and it was interesting to see how you could buy a brand new furnace for a couple $100 or something like that. I mean, the prices were crazy for compared to what we're used to now.
Yeah, I did a history reading on it there. The train had its own siding over there for people to take the train to the fair. And
people came to Mansfield from Elmira and Williamsport on the train. Actually, Arnott was a boom town. People from Elmira came to Arnott for something to do, like some of us go to Elmira, or used to go to Elmira in the 60s and 70s. That's just hard to fathom.
Yeah.
But they brought them in by the trainload here for the Mansfield Fair.
Absolutely. So you remember the train tracks coming through town, too. They were here till the flood of 72, I believe.
Well, if you look right to your left from where you're sitting, the train tracks went right there, right across the street. They came from the south end of town, went right across here, crossed Main Street up here by the other intersection, and then went back down what's now Basansani Drive before they changed the road. Mm-hmm. And the road was higher, and they had a bridge there for the road to go across, and the train went underneath that.
I've seen the old pictures of that. It's fascinating seeing a train come across Main Street, Mansfield.
Yes, it is. It was.
So you would have been younger then. Did you ever hop on the train or take a ride on the train? Or you can confess it. It's okay.
I didn't.
Okay.
There was one time when I was about 5 years old, and my grandmother took me to visit my grandfather's sister and family down in Toms River, New Jersey. We went to Williamsport and rode the train to New Jersey, and I remember being 5 years old, and I lost my toy tractor. I left it on the doggone train. I still remember that.
Where'd you get on the train? Right.
In Williamsport.
Yeah, and then took it from there all the way. Wow. You still were traumatized by losing your toy on the train.
I lost my tractor. I prized little tractor.
Do you remember some of the other events, 4th of July in Mansfield, going to that as a kid, or some of those other things that... I assume there was a 4th of July celebration here.
Yeah, it was a 4th of July celebration. It went back a long, long time. In fact, when I first came back to the area, I was on a committee and ended up being in charge of the 4th of July celebration. And we worked all year long to put that together.
People have no idea how much work it takes to make even a small festival happen. And the bigger the festival, the more volunteers it takes.
We ran all year long, and we met monthly. And then as we got closer and closer to the time, it was weekly and maybe even more often than that. And we had a core of at least a dozen people. It's hard to make one of those things go. They used to have what they call booster tickets, and they had members of the Chamber of Commerce that as their service for it, they would sell the booster tickets because they were used to dealing with people, and the people knew them and were used to dealing with them. So they raised quite a bit of money to help finance the 4th of July by the booster tickets as a kind of an admission.
Yeah. A way to support...
to the 4th of July.
Yeah.
And support the fireworks and all the things. Fireworks got astronomically expensive over the years, and that's a whole different ballgame than it used to be.
Yeah, and it's a lot tougher to get your permits and everything to do that sort of thing, too. Back then, I'm sure it was more just, hey, you guys want to do some fireworks? Great.
That was pretty much, yes. There were no other permits or any of that stuff. And, in recent years, they set up the fireworks on the dike. There wasn't any dike there then.
Before 1972, that Smythe Park was prone to some pretty big flooding.
It was generally not around the 4th of July.
Mm-hmm. The drier months of the year, you're a little more lucky, probably.
Yeah.
I forgot, I wanted to ask you, when we were talking about the Great Mansfield Fair, you had mentioned to me before we started this that you saw little Jimmy Dickens there.
I did, and that was one of his last, I guess he was the last
I believe that was the last year that they had the fair. He was there.
Yeah, and they had the old grandstand there. I mean, it was amazing. The whole park was covered with buildings down there. They were pavilions. They had displays in. There was a ladies' pavilion. There were all kinds of different things that they had with different businesses that had displays.
Baseball was pretty big there, too.
It was. And at that time, the university didn't have, it wasn't a university then, it was Mansfield College, but they didn't have the athletic fields on the campus the way they do now. And their sports events were at Smythe Park. Their baseball team played at Smythe Park in front of the grandstand. The football team played down there.
I didn't realize that. So the college was very associated with the town, whereas you went up there to go to school for elementary school, and they came down to town to play sports.
Right, they did.
So a lot more sort of melting into the community type thing.
Those were different days.
Yeah.
In some ways, we'd like to go back to that. In other ways, that's like, no, we're okay where they are now.
So when did photography come into your life? When did you get your very first camera?
Actually, would you believe that I took my 32-day travel abroad tour of Europe with a Kodak Instamatic? I knew nothing about photography at the time. And then when I was in the Navy, instead of getting a school commensurate with my college degree, they sent me swabbing the deck and chipping paint on a floating bucket of rust out on the West Coast, and it took me a while to get off of that and I ended up at journalism school, and part of the journalism was a crash course in photography, and then I spent 2.5 years doing that, and they also did a little bit of radio stuff with us there. There was a small segment on broadcasting, not enough that I wanted to pursue that as a career or anything. But,
good choice.
but the journalism aspect of it was pretty good, and I spent 2.5 years at the Navy submarine base in New London, Connecticut, doing journalism and photography, and I learned the hard way that I had an old Nikon F camera with no light meter, and it was just by guess and by gosh what kind of exposure that you made, and thankfully there was a lot of latitude with those old black and white films.
I think a lot of people forgot how we used to take pictures. We had no idea what we got until we developed the picture. Now, when people take a picture with their phone, they look at it and go, hold on, let me take one more.
Yeah.
You weren't smiling.
Well, there was always one more, but it was just to cover the bases because you didn't know what you were going to get. And unless you were really, really good at watching people, you wouldn't know whether or not they weren't smiling, or especially if you had a bigger group. It was very hard to tell. But over the course of my career, I got pretty good at watching people, and I knew.
You get a feel for how to grab the right moment.
Yeah, and we could have a dozen people in a group, and I did a number of pictures, and I could look at you and say, oh, Kevin, you weren't smiling in that last picture. Then I would make a joke out of it, and I would say to the rest of them that said, well, maybe some of the rest of you weren't either, but he's the only one I caught.
This is before the days of Photoshop, when you could have two pictures and take somebody's head off of one picture and put it on the other one smiling.
Yeah, well, that technology, when it first came out and I sent it to my lab to have them do it, cost me $100 a pop to do. And I learned very quickly when Photoshop came out how to do that myself.
So what do you think about digital photography these days versus the old days? Film photography versus the new digital?
In a lot of ways, digital made things easier, and in a lot of other ways, they made it harder. I used to do a portrait session, throw the film in the bag, take it to the post office, mail it to my lab in Pittsburgh, and take 2 days to get there, and then they'd process it and send all that stuff back to me, and it would take 10 days or so, and I finally got it back. And digital came along, and yeah, it's easy. You can see right away. But they transferred the workload back to me. Instead of me sending it to the lab, it was all right here. So I spent an inordinate amount of time on a computer, not only learning how to do that, but processing all the images. So yeah, digital's easy, but my workload is tripled.
Yeah.
Because of doing all the digital work. And people don't see that.
Yeah. I don't think we're keeping as many, even though we're taking 10 times as many pictures as we used to, I think we're losing a lot of them because we're never printing them, or we don't have the negatives to keep. And, people lose their phone, get rid of their phone, don't have a backup of it. Even though we have so many pictures, I think we don't have so many pictures these days.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that we get complacent about. We take it for granted that we always have that, and then they just don't bother with it, and then all of a sudden we don't have that when we really want it. And that's one of the joys about the career in photography, is working with people in the happiest times of their life, and we often don't know how much the things we do really mean to people. Quite a few times that we do things that are just priceless, that they just really touch people, and that's the great part of what I've done for the living for the last 40 years.
Creating memories for people so that they can look back and see where they were at that point in life. How many people have you photographed? Any idea?
Many thousands. I don't know. 1 year, I think in the early 1980s, I worked with a color lab in Crown Point, Indiana, Burrell Color, and they had enough computers that they kept track of all the 4x5 proofs that I sent into them. And I think there was, because I did quite a few weddings, and yeah, that first year in 1980, for example, I think we did 36 weddings, and I had 2 other people helping me photograph weddings, because I couldn't be several different places at the same time. And you shoot 100 or 150 images at a wedding, and those numbers go up pretty dramatically in short order. So I think Burrell reported that I had 10,000 4x5 pictures that year.
That's a lot of pictures. Wow.
That's a lot of
pictures.
Film. Yeah, I had a pretty hefty film bill back in the day, too. So when I had digital and I didn't have to go through that was fine. Except the first memory cards were extremely expensive.
And only held so much.
There was a 250 megabyte card, I think, when I first bought the digital camera, that they charged me about $350. Now I can buy a 32 gig card, 2 of them for $25.
Yeah, so definitely
It's a world of difference.
some things have actually come down in price, but not everything.
No, not everything. And the camera has gone a whole different price, too.
Looks like we're running out of time today. Can you join us again next week, Bruce?
Well, sometime I'd be glad to.
All right, we'll have you on next week here on KC101. You've been listening to Saturday with Seniors, brought to you by Eisenhower's, Tioga County Harley-Davidson, South Mansfield on Old Route 15. Don't forget Eisenhower's for your winter storage and ask about their free winter storage option when you spend $899 or more on service, parts, and labor. Also, keep them in mind for your holiday shopping at Eisenhower's, Tioga County Harley-Davidson. And if you're looking to sell your motorcycle, they buy used motorcycles there as well. If you missed any of today's episode, go to our YouTube channel or just search Saturday with Seniors on YouTube, and you will find that we have close to 80 programs on our YouTube channel to watch or listen to that include residents